You wake up and you already feel the weight. It's not physical tiredness, it's not exactly sleepiness. It's something deeper, more visceral. It's as if the very idea of getting up, of facing another day identical to the previous one, were a titanic task with no apparent purpose. You look at the ceiling and think, what for? Your eyes scan that familiar space, the same stains, the same textures, and something inside you simply cannot find sufficient reason to move your body. It's not laziness. You know laziness, it has a different flavor, almost pleasurable, a conscious indulgence. This is something else, it's a kind of existential paralysis, where every future movement seems to demand a justification you can no longer formulate. Have you ever felt this? That deep, almost magnetic desire to simply remain horizontal, to let the world spin without you for a few hours, maybe for an entire day. It's more common than we imagine, and it's much deeper than productivity culture would like to admit. We're not necessarily talking about clinical depression, although it may be related. We're talking about something that Albert Camus, the philosopher of the absurd, understood with disturbing clarity. The moment when the curtain of routine tears and you see, really see, the repetitive, mechanical, and apparently purposeless nature of daily existence. Today we're going to explore why you feel this desire to stay in bed all day, not through the lens of pop psychology or empty motivational speeches, but through Camus' existentialist philosophy. We're going to dive into this feeling that society quickly labels as a problem, as a character flaw, as something to be corrected and medicated. We're going to understand what this desire for immobility is trying to tell us about our relationship with the world, with time, with the very act of living. And more importantly, we're going to discover that this feeling, as uncomfortable as it may be, can be the beginning of something revolutionary, the first step toward a more authentic and conscious life. I'm not going to promise that at the end you'll jump out of bed full of energy. I'm not going to offer productivity tricks disguised as philosophy, but I'm going to offer something more valuable: understanding. Because sometimes understanding the why is already half the journey. Morning arrives and you execute the movements automatically. The alarm goes off, you turn it off. Maybe you roll over in bed, grab your phone, scroll through the screen without really seeing anything. You get up, brush your teeth with that empty expression in the mirror, have coffee, get dressed, leave. Or maybe you work from home and switch from bed to chair, starting the daily sequence of tasks that seem important, but whose meaning you can no longer articulate. Weeks turn into months, months into years, and you realize you're living on autopilot. Camus had a name for this: the absurd. Not the absurd in the colloquial sense of ridiculous or nonsense, but the absurd with a capital A, the fundamental condition of human existence. It's the conflict between our desperate search for meaning, purpose, and clarity, and the indifferent silence of the universe that offers no definitive answer. Think about this for a moment. You wake up, work, eat, sleep, and repeat. What for? To pay bills. To pay bills for what? To keep life functioning. So that life functions for what? So that you can continue waking up, working, eating, sleeping. It's a circle that points to nothing beyond itself. There's no telos, no clear and evident final purpose. We can invent purposes, of course. Society offers several: professional success, starting a family, accumulating experiences, contributing to something greater. And these purposes work for a while. They keep the machine running. But then comes that day, that morning, when something breaks. You're lying down, and you simply can no longer believe the story you'd been telling yourself. The veil falls. Camus describes this moment masterfully in The Myth of Sisyphus. He talks about the man who lives mechanically, following the gestures of life, until one day suddenly he questions, why? It's just one word, 3 letters, but it carries the weight of a revelation. Why do I do this? Why do I get up? Why do I continue this routine? And in that moment of questioning, the absurd emerges. It's not that life is objectively meaningless, it's that there's no ready-made, definitive answer written in the stars. Meaning isn't given. If there is meaning, we're the ones who need to create it. And that task is exhausting because it's never complete, never guaranteed. That desire to stay in bed, then, isn't weakness. It's lucidity. It's the moment when you stop pretending that automatic movements carry intrinsic meaning. It's when you recognize, perhaps for the first time in a visceral and not just intellectual way, that you're trapped in a giant gear that doesn't care about you individually. Your job can be replaced. Your relationships are contingent, fragile, subject to time and change. Your achievements will be forgotten. It sounds nihilistic, and in a certain sense it is, but Camus invites us to look at this without averting our eyes, because it's precisely in the honest recognition of the absurd that we can find a form of freedom. When you're lying down, resisting the imperative to get up, you are, in a certain sense, in silent revolt. You're saying no to the machine, even if temporarily. You're refusing to participate in the theater before understanding your role, and this refusal is important. It's the harbinger of something, but it can also become a trap, because recognizing the absurd is only the first step. What Camus shows us is that we have choices about how to respond to this revelation. We can surrender to despair. We can seek false consolations in ideologies or religions that promise definitive answers, or we can do something braver. We can accept the absurd and still choose to live. Staying in bed all day, in this perspective, is neither solution nor problem in itself. It's a symptom. It's your body and mind saying, stop, something isn't right, something needs to be recognized. And what needs to be recognized is that you were living as if things made sense automatically, as if purpose were evident, and now you've discovered it's not. Now you see the machinery, the wires, the artificiality of the structures you took as natural. And that's terrifying, but it's also the beginning of the possibility of authenticity. Let's go deeper. Why has routine become unbearable? Because at some level you realized you were living someone else's life, following a script written by forces you never questioned. Parents, society, culture, economy, all deposited expectations on you, and you internalized them so deeply that you came to believe they were your own desires. Do you want that job, or were you conditioned to want it? Do you value those achievements, or are you pursuing the approval of ghosts? Did you choose this life, or was it chosen for you by a succession of small surrenders, each seeming reasonable at the time? Camus invites us to recognize that we live in a world of masks, not in the superficial sense of falseness, but in the sense that we continuously perform social roles. You're the competent professional, the reliable friend, the responsible child, the attentive partner. Each context demands a performance, and these performances are necessary for social life. But at some point you start to wonder, where am I in all this? Who am I when I'm not performing any role? And the answer can be frightening. You don't know. You spent so much time being what others expected that you lost touch with what you genuinely desire, if that even exists as something separate from all these influences. When you're lying down, immobile, you're in a kind of existential strike. You're saying, I won't continue the performance until I understand what I'm doing and why. It's an act of resistance against alienation. Karl Marx spoke about alienation in the context of work, how the worker becomes estranged from the product of their labor. But alienation goes beyond that. You can become estranged from life itself, living as if you were a spectator of your own movie, following the script without participating in the writing. Here's the crucial point that Camus offers. The absurd isn't something to be solved, it's something to be lived. He doesn't seek a metaphysical answer that dissolves the problem. He accepts that life doesn't come with an instruction manual, that meaning isn't engraved in the cosmos waiting to be discovered. And instead of despair, he finds in this a form of radical freedom. If there's no predetermined purpose, then you're free to create your own. If there's no fixed human essence, you're free to invent yourself. But this freedom comes with a price: total responsibility. You can no longer blame God, fate, society, your parents. You stand naked before existence, and every choice is yours. The temptation is to seek certainties. That's why ideologies and religions are so attractive. They offer maps, they offer answers, they offer the promise that if you follow the rules, everything will eventually make sense. Camus calls this philosophical suicide, the surrender of reason and revolt in exchange for consolation. There's no moral judgment in this, just the recognition that it's an escape. And maybe you need escape. Maybe we all need it at certain moments. But if you want to live authentically, if you want to transform this desire to stay in bed into something productive in the deepest sense, you need to go through the discomfort without seeking shortcuts. So you're lying down. Hours pass. Maybe you feel guilt. The voice of productivity whispers that you're wasting time, that there are things to do, that you're failing. But what if you simply observe this feeling without judgment? What if you recognize that this paralysis is your psyche trying to protect you from more violence against yourself? Because continuing on autopilot, continuing to pretend that things make sense when you know they don't, is a form of internal violence. It's a lie, and living in a lie corrodes. Camus tells us about revolt, not just political revolt, but metaphysical revolt, the refusal to passively accept the absurd condition. Staying in bed can be the opposite of revolt, or it can be its first movement depending on what you do with it. If it's permanent surrender, it's death in life. But if it's a pause for recognition, it's the fertile ground where something new can grow. The question is, what are you going to plant there? Now I'd like you to pause for a moment and reflect on your own experience. When was the last time you felt this desire to stay in bed all day? What was happening in your life? What role were you tired of performing? Leave a comment sharing your experience. There's no judgment here, just genuine curiosity about how this manifests in different lives. And as you write, ask yourself, what was this desire trying to tell me? Let's create a space of mutual recognition, because solidarity in the absurd is one of the most powerful things we can share. After you recognize the absurd, after the illusion of automatic purpose dissolves, comes the hardest part, rebuilding. But it's not about rebuilding the same structures that crumbled. That would be like mending clothes that no longer fit. It's about building something new, something that honestly recognizes the absurd condition and still chooses affirmation. Camus uses the figure of Sisyphus as the supreme symbol of this. Sisyphus was condemned by the gods to roll a rock to the top of a mountain, only to watch it roll back down, repeating this eternally. It's the perfect image of futility, of repetition without progress, of effort without final reward. Sounds like the perfect description of modern routine, doesn't it? But Camus does something surprising. He asks us to imagine Sisyphus happy. How is this possible? How can someone condemned to an absurd and eternal task be happy? The answer lies in consciousness and attitude. Sisyphus knows his condition. He doesn't delude himself about the rock's fate. Each time it rolls down, he knows he'll have to start over. But it's precisely in this knowledge, in this lucidity about the absurd, that he finds freedom. He's not waiting for the day when the rock will stay at the top. He's not postponing life until after the task is complete. He finds meaning and even joy in the very act of rolling the rock, in the conscious descent to begin again, in the silent revolt against the gods who tried to destroy him with futility. Transporting this to your life, when you're lying down, paralyzed by the perception that tomorrow will be the same as today, that next week will repeat the previous one, you're watching the rock roll down the mountain again, and the temptation is despair. But what Camus suggests is radical transformation of perspective. Not denial of the absurd, not invention of false purpose, but deep acceptance combined with conscious choice of values and passions. You may not control the fact that life is repetitive, that there's no ultimate meaning, that we'll all die and be forgotten, but you can control how you inhabit this reality. The transformation begins with acceptance, not resignation, which is passive and defeated, but active acceptance. Yes, life is absurd. Yes, there are no guarantees. Yes, maybe everything is fundamentally without cosmic meaning. So what? This frees you from impossible expectations. You no longer need to save the world. You no longer need to achieve some form of immortality through grand deeds. You no longer need to prove your worth to some cosmic judge who doesn't even exist. You can simply live intensely in the only time that really exists. Now. But living intensely doesn't mean frenzied productivity. This is where many interpretations of Camus go wrong. It's not about doing more, achieving more, experiencing more. It's about quality of presence, about authenticity of engagement. It's about consciously choosing your rocks. Because you're going to have to roll rocks, metaphorically speaking. Life demands effort, work, repetition. But you can choose which rocks are worth your effort, which struggles are worth your energy. And when you choose consciously, even the repetitive task transforms. It stops being external imposition and becomes expression of freedom. Think of someone who works at a job they hate just for the money. Every day is torture because there's no connection between the activity and what the person values. Now think of someone who does the same work but chose to be there for clear reasons. perhaps to support a passion outside of work, or because they value stability, or because they recognize value in the activity even though it's mundane. Same task, completely different relationship. The difference lies in consciousness and choice. One is in denial of the absurd, pretending the work has meaning it doesn't have. The other recognizes the absurd, but has chosen their response to it. This conscious choice requires something our culture desperately avoids: confrontation with mortality. Because when you truly internalize that you're going to die, that your time is finite, that there's no second chance, your priorities change. What seemed essential reveals itself as trivial. What you postponed becomes urgent. You stop living for some hypothetical future where everything will finally make sense and start investing in the present, which is all you have. Camus lived this viscerally. He grew up poor in Algeria, had tuberculosis young, lived under the shadow of death. And perhaps that's why his philosophy has this quality of urgency, of passion for life despite everything. When you get out of bed after recognizing the absurd, you don't get up because you have to, you get up because you choose to. And in that choice, however minuscule it may seem, lies all the difference. You're no longer on autopilot. You're conscious. And consciousness, though sometimes painful, is what makes us human in the deepest sense. Animals live in the present without questioning. Machines execute programming. Conscious humans live in the tension between recognizing the absence of given meaning and creating meaning through choices. The transformation also involves a different relationship with failure and success. In the traditional model, you pursue goals, achieve or fail, and your identity is tied to these outcomes. But if you recognize the absurd, these concepts lose much of their power over you. Failure at what? According to what criteria? Defined by whom? You can completely recalibrate, defining success not by external results, but by internal integrity. Am I living according to my chosen values? Am I present in my life? Am I relating authentically? These questions are more relevant and more difficult than any conventional success metric. And what about human relationships? Does the absurd isolate us or connect us? Both. Recognizing that each person is fundamentally alone in their consciousness, that no one can really live your life for you or carry your weight, can seem isolating, but it can also be liberating. You stop demanding that others fill voids that only you can fill. You stop projecting impossible expectations. And paradoxically, when you accept the fundamental solitude, you become capable of more genuine connection, because you meet others not out of desperate need, but by choice and affinity. You recognize in them the same condition, the same struggle, and in that recognition there's deep solidarity. Camus speaks about human solidarity not as sentimental abstraction, but as recognition of the shared condition. We're all condemned to roll our rocks. We all face the absurd. And there's something immensely powerful in recognizing this in the other, in not being alone in this lucidity. It's not that the absurd disappears in company, but the burden becomes more bearable when you know you're not the only one seeing the truth. So the transformation, in the end, is about living with open eyes, not seeking comfort in illusions, not pretending you have answers you don't have, but also not surrendering to paralyzing nihilism. It's the difficult middle ground, the constant revolt against the temptation of despair or escapism. It's waking up each day knowing it may mean nothing in the grand scheme of things, but choosing to invest in it intensely anyway. It's rolling the rock consciously, perhaps even with a smile, because you understood that the rock isn't punishment, it's life itself, and you choose to inhabit it fully. If you're finding this perspective useful, if something here is resonating with your experience, consider subscribing to the channel. We continue exploring these deep existential questions, always seeking radical honesty instead of easy answers. It's a community of people willing to look at what's difficult and find beauty and strength in it. We now arrive at the most urgent, practical question: how to live with consciousness of the absurd, how to integrate this philosophical understanding into concrete routine without falling into extremes. Because there are traps. One is total nihilism, where you conclude that if nothing matters, then anything goes, and you slide into destructive behavior or complete apathy. The other is false optimism, where you recognize the absurd intellectually, but act as if you didn't, building new sandcastles knowing the tide will take them but pretending it won't. Camus' answer is lucid revolt, Revolt not against people or systems specifically, but against the absurd condition itself, a refusal to passively accept or seek escape. And this revolt manifests through passion, living passionately not despite the absurd but in response to it. Since there's no given meaning, since you're fundamentally free, why not fully embrace the experiences, the people, the projects that resonate with you? Why not completely surrender to what you've chosen, knowing there are no guarantees, that it could go wrong, that you could fail or get hurt, but doing it anyway because the alternative is death in life? Think about the difference between someone who eats a meal thinking about other things, checking their phone, just fueling the body, and someone who eats consciously, savoring, present. Same meal, totally different experience. What Camus proposes is applying this quality of presence and intensity to all existence, not as an empty mindfulness exercise, but as an act of revolt against the tendency to live mechanically. Each moment becomes an opportunity for conscious affirmation. This doesn't mean you'll wake up one day transformed and never again feel the desire to stay in bed. There will be difficult days. There will be moments when the absurd weighs too much, when repetition is overwhelming, when you question your choices. This is part of the condition. But the difference is that now you have a framework to understand these moments. They're not failures. They're part of the natural oscillation between recognition of the absurd and revolt against it. Sisyphus doesn't roll the rock once and stay happy forever. He rolls eternally, and happiness lies in how he relates to each roll, to each descent to begin again. Living consciously also requires cultivating authentic values, not externally imposed values, but values you chose after honest reflection. What really matters to you? Not what should matter according to society, not what your parents value, not what's fashionable, but what resonates with who you are when you take off all the masks. Maybe it's creating something. Maybe it's connecting deeply with people. Maybe it's seeking beauty or knowledge or justice. There's no universal right answer. Authenticity lies in choosing consciously and living according to that choice. And here's something crucial. You can change. Your values can evolve. Camus doesn't propose a fixed essence. You don't need to discover your hidden true self. You can invent and reinvent yourself. The consistency that matters isn't never changing, but always being honest with yourself about where you are and what you choose in this moment. Coherence is between what you say you value and how you live, not between who you were 10 years ago and who you are today. Building authentic connections in this context means finding people with whom you can be honest about the absurd condition, people who won't try to fix you or offer platitudes. People who are also struggling with these questions, who also recognize the absurd but choose to live passionately. There's something deeply consoling in not being alone in this lucidity, in being able to share both the pain and the joy of living consciously. And these connections, fragile and temporary like everything else, become precious precisely because of their contingency. You value them more when you know there are no guarantees, when you're present in them, knowing they could end. The joy in conscious revolt, this concept that seems contradictory, is perhaps Camus' most radical insight. How can there be joy in recognizing the absurd? Because the alternative is worse. Living in denial, on autopilot, anesthetized, is a form of death. But awakening to reality, however harsh it may be, is being truly alive, and there's a strange joy in that, a lightness that comes from no longer carrying the weight of impossible expectations. When you accept that life doesn't need to have a grand meaning, that maybe it's just this series of loosely connected moments, you can relax into the absurd. You can even laugh at it. You can find humor in the human condition, in this creature that seeks meaning in a universe that provides none. Happy Sisyphus isn't a cruel joke. It's an invitation to radical transformation of perspective. He's happy not because the task changed, but because he changed how he relates to it. He's happy because he's conscious, because he's free, because his constant revolt against the absurd is itself a form of triumph. The gods wanted to destroy him with futility, but he didn't let himself be destroyed. He embraced the rock. He owned his task. And in that act of conscious ownership, he transformed punishment into affirmation. You can do the same. Your routine, your life, your limitations, your failures, your temporary victories, all of this is your rock. You can resent it, You can pretend it has meaning it doesn't have, or you can consciously embrace it. You can wake up each day and choose to roll your rock not because you have to, but because you want to, because it's your rock. Because while you roll, you're alive, conscious, present, revolting against the absurd but participating in life anyway. And there's a fierce beauty in that, a dignity that no external circumstance can take from you. The desire to stay in bed all day, then, seen through this lens, isn't the end. It's potentially the beginning. It's your body and your psyche saying that something needs to change, not necessarily in external circumstances, but in the internal relationship with life. It's an invitation to stop pretending, to recognize the absurd, to feel the weight of it, and then, after really feeling it, to get up not out of obligation but by choice, to roll your rock consciously with passion, perhaps even with joy because you understood that the rock is life, and life, absurd as it is all you have and all you need. There's no final solution to the absurd. You won't wake up one day enlightened, free from all doubts and difficulties. The human condition is constant tension, oscillation between recognition of futility and choice of life. And maybe it's exactly this tension that keeps us human, that prevents us from sliding into the fanaticism of false certainties or the paralysis of total nihilism. Living consciously is living in this tension, accepting it, even embracing it. It's waking up knowing you're going to die one day, that nothing you do will last forever, that the universe is indifferent to your existence, and still choosing breakfast, choosing to hug someone, choosing to create something, choosing to laugh, choosing to roll the rock one more time. Not because there's an ultimate reason, but because you can, because while you live, you have this absurd freedom to choose, and this freedom, despite everything, is precious and worthy of being exercised.